Hello, and welcome to Mythical Stories. Tonight, we're embarking on a profound journey into one of the most enduring mysteries in human history, the lost civilization of Atlantis. Not the fantasy version from movies and novels, not the New Age speculation about crystal powers and ancient astronauts, but the original story, the philosophical tale told by the Greek philosopher Plato, and the genuine mysteries that surround it. What if Atlantis still holds unanswered mysteries? Not the mystery of whether it existed, we'll explore that question, but the deeper mysteries of why this story has captivated human imagination for over 2,000 years. What truth might lie buried beneath layers of myth and speculation, what Plato was really trying to communicate, and why the search for Atlantis continues, even now in the 21st century, despite centuries of investigation that have produced no definitive proof of its existence. Tonight, you'll discover the original Atlantis story as Plato told it. Explore the genuine archaeological sites that have been proposed as the real Atlantis. Consider the philosophical and symbolic meanings the story might carry, and find peace in the profound truth that some mysteries inspire us, not because they can be solved, but because they speak to something deep in human consciousness, something that needs mystery, that requires the unknown, that finds meaning in the search itself rather than in any final answer. Atlantis represents more than a lost city. It represents lost perfection, lost golden age, lost wisdom, lost connection to something greater than ourselves. Every culture has stories of a better time, a paradise lost, a fall from grace. Atlantis is the Western world's version of this universal human story, and whether it was real or allegory or something in between, it carries power, holds meaning, inspires searches across oceans and centuries, and the depths of human imagination. Before we journey deeper into the mysteries of Atlantis, if you're enjoying this peaceful content and would like more stories like this, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to Mythical Stories. Your support helps us create more calming content designed specifically for your rest and relaxation. Thank you for being here with us tonight. Now, let's prepare for our journey into Atlantis. Find a comfortable position in your bed, allowing your body to sink completely into rest, feeling the timeless peace that exists beneath the surface of things, the calm that lives in depths, the profound stillness that might exist in sunken cities resting on the ocean floor. Take a deep breath in through your nose, drawing in the mysterious energy of Atlantis, the civilization that may have been, the wisdom that may have existed, the knowledge that may have been lost beneath the waves, and let it out slowly through your mouth, releasing any need for definitive answers, any frustration with unsolved mysteries, any discomfort with stories that blur the line between history and myth. Again, breathe in deeply, filling your lungs with the patience of the ocean that keeps its secrets, that holds whatever may lie beneath its surface in silent depths, that reveals nothing without careful searching, and even then reveals only fragments, only hints, only possibilities. And release, feeling your shoulders drop, your jaw unclench, your whole body softening, like sinking through water, descending through layers of ocean, moving from surface light down through twilight and into the deep blue mysteries where lost things rest, where forgotten civilizations might sleep, where the past remains preserved in the timeless depths. One more time, breathe in the story of Atlantis, the tale that has survived for millennia, that has inspired countless searches, that continues to fascinate despite, or perhaps because of, its mysterious nature. And let everything go, sinking deeper into rest, deeper into peace, deeper into the profound calm that exists when you stop demanding answers and simply allow mystery to be mysterious. Allow the unknown to remain unknown. Allow stories to carry meaning whether or not they describe literal historical events. Perfect. You don't need to do anything but listen. You can close your eyes or keep them gently open, gazing into darkness like gazing into deep ocean water where light fades and mystery begins. There's nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to accomplish, nothing you need to prove or solve or definitively answer. Just rest. Just be still. Just allow the mysteries of Atlantis to carry you gently into the most peaceful, restorative sleep. Let's begin our journey into the unanswered mysteries of Atlantis. The original story, Plato's Atlantis. To understand the mystery of Atlantis, we must begin where the story begins, with the Greek philosopher Plato, writing in approximately 360 BCE, about 2400 years ago. Plato was one of the most influential philosophers in Western history, a student of Socrates, teacher of Aristotle, founder of the Academy in Athens. He wrote philosophical dialogues, conversations between characters discussing virtue, justice, knowledge, the nature of reality. In two of these dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, Plato tells the story of Atlantis, not as the main focus, interestingly, but as an introduction to a larger philosophical discussion. The story is told by Critias, who claims he heard it from his grandfather, who heard it from the Athenian statesman Solon, who heard it from Egyptian priests during a visit to Egypt. According to Critias, the Egyptian priests told Solon about events that occurred 9,000 years before Solon's time, which would place them approximately 9,600 years before the present day, around 9600 BCE. The priests described two great civilizations, ancient Athens, far more ancient than the Athens of Solon's or Plato's time, and Atlantis, a powerful island civilization located beyond the Pillars of Heracles, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, the narrow passage between the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. Atlantis, according to the story, was a large island, larger than Libya and Asia combined, which in ancient Greek geography meant larger than North Africa and Asia Minor combined, suggesting a landmass of enormous size. The island was ruled by Poseidon, god of the sea, who fell in love with a mortal woman named Clito. Poseidon created the island paradise for her, shaping it with circular bands of land and water, alternating rings that surrounded a central hill where he built a palace. Poseidon and Clito had 10 sons who became the first rulers of Atlantis. The eldest, Atlas, gave his name to the island and to the ocean surrounding it. These sons and their descendants ruled Atlantis for generations, dividing the island into 10 kingdoms. Atlantis prospered. The island was rich in natural resources, with fertile soil, abundant forests, plentiful minerals, including the mysterious orichalcum, a metal mentioned by Plato that was second only to gold in value and that we cannot definitively identify today. The Atlanteans were sophisticated engineers, building harbors, bridges, canals, temples, palaces. The capital city featured those concentric rings of land and water, connected by bridges with a great canal cutting through the rings to allow ships to reach the central island where the main temple and royal palace stood. The outer rings of land were used for agriculture, for housing, for military installations. The Atlanteans developed a powerful navy, controlled shipping through the Strait of Gibraltar, and eventually began conquering other lands. Their empire expanded to include parts of Europe and Africa. They grew wealthy, powerful, advanced in technology and organization. But they also grew proud, corrupt, greedy. The divine nature they inherited from Poseidon became diluted over generations as they intermarried with mortals. They began to value material wealth over virtue, power over justice, conquest over wisdom. Zeus, king of the gods, saw the corruption of Atlantis and decided to punish the civilization to teach them humility. He called the other gods to council to discuss the fate of Atlantis. And here, Plato's dialogue Critias ends abruptly, unfinished. We never learn exactly what Zeus decided. We never hear the details of how Atlantis was destroyed. But in the dialogue Timaeus, which was written first but takes place chronologically after the events in Critias, we're told that Atlantis was defeated in war by ancient Athens, and that afterward violent earthquakes and floods occurred. And in a single day and night, Atlantis sank beneath the sea, disappearing completely, leaving the ocean in that region shallow and impassable due to mud just below the surface. That's the original story. That's all Plato tells us. It's remarkably detailed in some ways, describing the layout of the city, the organization of the government, the resources of the island. But it's also vague in others, never precisely locating Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Heracles, never explaining exactly what orichalcum was, never detailing the technology or capabilities of the Atlanteans beyond general descriptions of engineering projects. And it ends frustratingly without describing the actual destruction of Atlantis, cutting off just as Zeus is about to pronounce judgment. This has led to 2.5 millennia of debate. Did Plato intend this as history, as allegory, as a mixture of both? Most modern scholars believe Plato invented Atlantis as a philosophical device, a thought experiment to explore ideas about ideal societies, the corruption of civilizations, the conflict between virtue and power. The story serves Plato's philosophical purposes perfectly. It shows a civilization that begins with divine wisdom and justice, but degenerates when it prioritizes material wealth and military power over virtue. It demonstrates the danger of empire, the corruption of power, the inevitability of divine punishment for hubris. These are themes Plato explored throughout his work. Atlantis might have been his way of making these abstract philosophical ideas concrete, giving them narrative form, creating a memorable story that would carry his teachings. But other scholars, particularly in earlier centuries, took the story more literally. If Plato said Egyptian priests told Solon about Atlantis, perhaps they did. If Plato dated the events to 9600 BCE, perhaps that date was based on actual records. If Plato described the civilization in detail, perhaps he was working from genuine historical sources. This interpretation treats Atlantis as a real place, a real civilization, that was destroyed and lost, remembered only in this one account preserved by Plato. The truth might be somewhere in between. Perhaps Plato heard stories about real catastrophic events, real civilizations, destroyed by natural disasters, real sunken lands, and wove these fragments of genuine history into his philosophical allegory. Perhaps Atlantis is historical memory, wrapped in myth, wrapped in philosophy, layers of meaning that cannot be easily separated into true and false. but must be understood as complex narrative, carrying multiple kinds of truth simultaneously. Tonight, as you rest, consider the original Atlantis story. Not the elaborations added by later writers, not the Hollywood versions or the New Age interpretations, but Plato's tale of a great civilization that rose to power, grew corrupt, and was destroyed in a day and a night of catastrophe. Whether this describes a real event or serves as philosophical allegory, it carries power, resonates with something deep in human consciousness, speaks to our awareness that civilizations do fall, that pride does precede destruction, that what is built can be unmade, that the sea holds secrets. Let Plato's Atlantis be the beginning of this journey. The source of the mystery, the origin of the search that has continued for over 2,000 years. And let it remind you that stories can be true in multiple ways simultaneously, that demanding a binary choice between real and fiction might miss deeper truths that exist in the space between, in the realm where history and philosophy and myth interweave into narratives that shape human understanding in ways that pure fact or pure fiction alone never could. The search for the real Atlantis, theories and candidates. Since Plato wrote about Atlantis, people have been searching for it. Over the centuries, over 100 different locations have been proposed as the real Atlantis. Some theories are based on careful archaeological research and geological analysis. Others are pure speculation, wishful thinking projected onto ancient ruins or natural features. Let's explore some of the most credible theories, the locations that genuinely might have inspired Plato's story, the places where something real, something catastrophic, something that could have been remembered and mythologized into the Atlantis tale actually occurred. The most famous and perhaps most scientifically supported theory locates Atlantis in the Mediterranean, specifically identifying it with the Minoan civilization on the islands of Crete and Thera, modern Santorini. The Minoans were a Bronze Age civilization that flourished from approximately 2600 to 1100 BCE. They built sophisticated palaces, developed advanced art and architecture, controlled maritime trade throughout the eastern Mediterranean, and were one of the most advanced European civilizations of their time. Their main center was the palace at Knossos on Crete, a massive complex with intricate architecture, sophisticated plumbing, beautiful frescoes, and evidence of complex bureaucratic organization. But around 1600 BCE, catastrophe struck. The volcanic island of Thera, about 70 miles north of Crete, exploded in one of the largest volcanic eruptions in human history. The eruption was cataclysmic, roughly 4 times as powerful as the famous Krakatoa eruption of 1883. The explosion was heard thousands of miles away. Volcanic ash fell across the eastern Mediterranean. The island of Thera was literally blown apart, with the center of the island collapsing into the sea, creating the caldera that exists today, a bay surrounded by cliffs, the remnant of a mountain that destroyed itself. The eruption triggered massive tsunamis that would have struck Crete with devastating force, flooding coastal areas, destroying ships, overwhelming settlements. Ashfall would have buried fields, poisoned water supplies, made the region uninhabitable for years. The Minoan civilization, while not completely destroyed, was severely weakened. Within a few generations, the palaces were abandoned, the civilization collapsed, and the Minoans disappeared from history, absorbed by Mycenaean Greeks who moved into the power vacuum. Could this be Atlantis? The parallels are striking. An advanced island civilization, sophisticated engineering, control of sea trade, sudden destruction by natural catastrophe involving water and fire, volcanic eruption and tsunami, the civilization sinking beneath the waves, not the entire island, but settlements flooded and buried, the civilization lost, remembered only in fragments. The problems with this identification are also significant. First, the timeline is wrong. Plato dates Atlantis to 9600 BCE. The Minoan catastrophe occurred around 1600 BCE, an 8,000-year discrepancy. Some researchers suggest Plato or his sources made an error in dating, perhaps confusing Egyptian calendar systems, perhaps adding an extra zero, perhaps misunderstanding how the Egyptian priests calculated time. If the 9,000 years were actually 900 years, the date would be approximately 1500 BCE, perfectly matching the Thera eruption. This explanation requires assuming Plato made or transmitted an error, which is possible but unprovable. Second, the location is wrong. Plato explicitly places Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Heracles, outside the Mediterranean, in the Atlantic Ocean. Crete and Thera are in the Mediterranean, well inside the Pillars of Heracles. Supporters of the Minoan theory argue that beyond the Pillars of Heracles might have been Plato's way of saying far away, or that the phrase was added to make the story seem more exotic, or that Plato deliberately changed the location to avoid his allegory being identified with a real place and time. Again, these explanations are possible but speculative. Third, the scale is wrong. Plato describes Atlantis as larger than Libya and Asia combined, a massive landmass. Crete and Thera are relatively small islands. The entire Minoan civilization, including all territories they controlled, was a fraction of the size Plato describes. However, mythological stories often exaggerate sizes and numbers. Perhaps the Egyptian priests or Solon or Plato himself amplified the scale to make the story more impressive, to emphasize the power of the civilization that was lost. Despite these problems, the Minoan theory remains popular among scholars because it identifies a real advanced civilization that was genuinely destroyed by catastrophe involving volcanic eruption and flooding, that left ruins we can study, that matches many details of Plato's story if we allow for embellishment and errors in transmission. Excavations on Santorini have uncovered the Minoan settlement of Akrotiri, buried under volcanic ash, preserved like Pompeii, showing sophisticated architecture, advanced plumbing, beautiful art, evidence of a thriving civilization frozen in time by catastrophe. Walking through Akrotiri, you can imagine this was Atlantis, or at least a city like Atlantis, a place of sophistication and beauty destroyed in a day and night of fire and water. Another theory places Atlantis in the Atlantic Ocean, taking Plato's location literally. Beyond the Pillars of Heracles lies the Atlantic. If Atlantis was there and sank, where would we find it now? Some researchers have pointed to the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, an underwater mountain range running down the center of the Atlantic Ocean. Parts of this ridge rise close to the surface. Iceland and the Azores are parts of the ridge that extend above sea level. Could Atlantis have been an island on this ridge that later sank? Geologically, this is extremely problematic. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge is a divergent plate boundary where the Eurasian and North American plates are moving apart. New ocean floor is being created, not destroyed. Islands don't sink at divergent boundaries, they're actually rising, being built up by volcanic activity. For a large island to sink rapidly, as Plato describes Atlantis doing, you need rapid subsidence, sudden collapse. This doesn't happen at mid-ocean ridges. Some catastrophic event would be required, something for which there's no geological evidence. Searches of the Atlantic seafloor have found no evidence of sunken cities, no ruins, no artificial structures, nothing suggesting an advanced civilization existed and sank in the Atlantic within the time frame Plato suggests, or even within human history. Modern oceanographic mapping has covered the Atlantic extensively. If a landmass the size Plato describes had existed and sunk, we would find evidence. We don't. This doesn't definitively prove Atlantis wasn't in the Atlantic. The ocean is vast, and not every square mile has been examined in detail. But it makes the Atlantic location increasingly implausible, as our ability to search improves and finds nothing. A third theory locates Atlantis in the Strait of Gibraltar itself, or just beyond it, in the region where the Mediterranean meets the Atlantic. This area has complex geology with underwater features that some researchers have interpreted as possibly artificial. The strait has changed significantly over geological time. During ice ages, when sea levels were lower, more land was exposed. Perhaps Atlantis was located on land that's now underwater due to sea level rise at the end of the last ice age. This theory attempts to honor Plato's location while acknowledging that sea levels have changed, that land can be submerged by rising water without requiring sudden catastrophic sinking. The problem is that sea level rise at the end of the Ice Age, while significant, about 400 feet globally, occurred gradually over thousands of years, not in a day and a night. And again, searches of the area have not found convincing evidence of sunken cities or advanced civilization. Other theories place Atlantis in dozens of other locations: Antarctica, before it was covered in ice, the Caribbean, the North Sea, the Black Sea, even in the Sahara Desert, which some believe was once wetter and could have hosted an advanced civilization. Each theory has its proponents. Each claims to find evidence in geological features or ancient ruins or textual analysis. But none has gained widespread scientific acceptance. None has produced definitive archaeological proof. The search for Atlantis has become something of an industry, with books, documentaries, expeditions, each claiming to have found the real location, each eventually failing to provide evidence convincing to mainstream archaeology. This pattern has led most scholars to conclude that Atlantis was Plato's invention, a philosophical allegory not based on any specific real location. The story combines elements that Plato might have known about: volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, earthquake-prone regions, civilizations that had risen and fallen. He wove these into a narrative serving his philosophical purposes. Whether any specific real civilization directly inspired the story is unknowable and perhaps irrelevant. The story works as philosophy, regardless of its historical basis, and yet the search continues. Something about Atlantis compels belief, inspires searching, refuses to be dismissed as pure fiction. Perhaps because every culture has stories of lost golden ages. Perhaps because we have genuine examples of civilizations destroyed by catastrophe. Perhaps because the ocean does keep secrets, does hide history, does contain places we haven't fully explored. Perhaps because the mystery itself is valuable, gives us something to search for, focuses our attention on the past and on the ocean, and on the possibility that knowledge has been lost, that wisdom existed and vanished, that we're not the pinnacle of human achievement, but perhaps one point in a cycle of rise and fall, that has repeated throughout human history. Tonight, let the search for Atlantis be a lullaby, not the destination, but the journey, not the answer, but the question, not the finding, but the seeking. The search for Atlantis has taken explorers across oceans, taken divers to deep waters, taken researchers through ancient texts and geological surveys, and whether Atlantis is ever found or proven never to have existed, the search itself has value, produces knowledge, deepens our understanding of ancient civilizations and geological processes, and the complex relationship between history and myth. Let yourself search in your dreams tonight. Search for lost cities, sunken wisdom, golden ages that might have been, and let the search be peaceful, not desperate. Let it be curiosity, not obsession. Let it be wonder, not need. You don't have to find Atlantis to benefit from searching for it. The journey is the gift. The mystery is the teacher. The unknown is the invitation to keep exploring, keep learning, keep wondering. The Atlantean mysteries, what the story teaches us. Whether Atlantis existed or not, the story itself holds mysteries, carries meanings, teaches lessons that remain relevant 2,400 years after Plato wrote them down. Let's explore not the historical mystery of whether Atlantis was real, but the philosophical and psychological mysteries of what the story means, what truths it carries, what it reveals about human civilization, human nature, and the patterns that repeat throughout history. The first mystery is the pattern of rise and fall. Atlantis begins with divine wisdom. Poseidon creates it. The first rulers are half divine, possessing both human and godly nature. They establish just laws, create a prosperous society, build impressive works. The civilization thrives, but over time, the divine nature becomes diluted. Later generations are more human, less godly. They begin to prioritize material wealth over virtue, power over justice, conquest over wisdom. The civilization becomes corrupt, aggressive, imperialistic. And then catastrophe strikes, divinely ordained, destroying the corrupt civilization. This pattern appears throughout history and mythology. A civilization rises through virtue and wisdom. It prospers, grows powerful, becomes wealthy. Success breeds pride, corruption, decadence. The civilization overreaches, grows arrogant, forgets the virtues that made it great, and then it falls, brought down by internal decay, external enemies, or natural catastrophe. Egypt, Babylon, Assyria, Persia, Greece, Rome, countless civilizations have followed this pattern. Rise, flourish, corrupt, fall. The cycle repeats. We see it in recent history. Spain, France, Britain, empires that dominated the world for a time and then declined, not disappearing but losing the preeminent position they once held. Some speculate about American decline, wondering if the United States is following the same pattern, rising to power in the 20th century, now showing signs of internal division and overextension that might presage decline in the 21st. Atlantis is the archetypal version of this cycle. Plato uses it to teach that power corrupts, that material success can lead to spiritual failure, that civilizations must maintain virtue or they will fall. The story warns against hubris, the pride that makes civilizations believe they're invincible, that the rules don't apply to them, that they can expand indefinitely without consequence. Zeus destroys Atlantis to teach humility. The warning is clear. No civilization, no matter how powerful, is immune to destruction. No empire lasts forever. Pride precedes a fall. The second mystery is the nature of perfection and its loss. Atlantis begins as paradise, an ideal society created by a god. The rings of land and water are perfectly designed. The resources are abundant. The government is just. The people are virtuous. This is Plato's ideal state, the utopia he describes in more detail in his dialogue Republic. But perfection cannot be maintained. Human nature intervenes. Even half-divine beings cannot resist the corrupting influence of power and wealth. The paradise is lost not through external attack, though Atlantis is eventually defeated by ancient Athens in war, but through internal decay, through the choices of the Atlanteans themselves who abandon virtue for vice. This teaches that utopia is impossible, or at least unsustainable. Perfection might be achieved momentarily, but it cannot last because humans are imperfect, are subject to temptation, greed, pride. Any system, no matter how well designed, will eventually be corrupted by the flaws of the people within it. This is tragic but realistic. We cannot create perfect societies because we're not perfect beings. The best we can hope for is to delay corruption, to build in safeguards against it, to remain vigilant against the human tendencies that undermine even the best systems. Atlantis serves as a warning. Even paradise can be lost. Vigilance is required. Virtue must be actively maintained, not assumed to persist automatically. Every generation must choose virtue anew, or the civilization will decline. The third mystery is about memory and what gets remembered. Plato frames the Atlantis story as ancient history transmitted through multiple sources. Egyptian priests to Solon, to Critias' grandfather, to Critias himself. Each transmission is an opportunity for distortion, embellishment, error. We don't know what the Egyptian priests actually told Solon, assuming they told him anything. We don't know what Solon remembered or how he transmitted it. We don't know what Critias' grandfather understood or what Critias recalled from childhood stories. And we don't know how much Plato altered in retelling. This raises questions about how history is remembered and transmitted. Stories change in the telling. Details are added, subtracted, modified. Fact blends with interpretation, blends with myth. Over enough time, over enough retellings, history becomes legend, becomes myth, until we can no longer separate what actually happened from what people believe happened, from what serves a cultural or philosophical purpose to believe happened. Atlantis might be an extreme example of this process. If there was a historical basis, some real civilization or event that inspired the story, it's been transformed so thoroughly that we cannot recover the original. We have only the myth, only Plato's version, only the story that has been shaped by multiple transmissions and by Plato's philosophical agenda. This teaches humility about historical knowledge. We don't know the past as well as we think we do. Written records can be lost, cultures can be forgotten, civilizations can vanish, leaving few traces. Later generations reconstruct the past from fragments, filling gaps with speculation, creating narratives that make sense to them, but that might bear little resemblance to what actually occurred. Atlantis represents lost history, knowledge we can't recover, understanding that has vanished, leaving only hints and rumors and stories that might contain truth, but that we cannot verify. The fourth mystery is about catastrophe and its role in history. Atlantis is destroyed suddenly, in a day and night, by earthquakes and floods. This catastrophic destruction is divine punishment, but is executed through natural forces. The story acknowledges that civilizations can end suddenly, that catastrophe can strike without warning, that everything built over generations can be destroyed in moments. History confirms this. Volcanic eruptions have destroyed civilizations. Earthquakes have leveled cities. Tsunamis have wiped out coastal settlements. In more recent history, we've added human-caused catastrophes, nuclear weapons, environmental collapse, climate change. The possibility of sudden civilizational destruction is not just ancient myth, it's ongoing reality. Atlantis teaches that catastrophe is always possible, that civilizations exist on borrowed time, that the stability we experience is temporary, that at any moment natural or human-made disaster could destroy what we've built. This is sobering, but important to remember. It encourages humility, reminds us not to take our civilization for granted, suggests we should prepare for disasters, should build resilience, should not assume that the future will resemble the present. The fifth mystery is about lost knowledge. If Atlantis existed, if it was as advanced as Plato describes, then enormous knowledge was lost when it sank. Architectural knowledge, engineering techniques, scientific understanding, philosophical wisdom, all would have vanished with the civilization. This possibility haunts us. We know that knowledge has been lost throughout history. The Library of Alexandria burned, destroying perhaps 500,000 scrolls. The Maya codices were mostly burned by Spanish conquistadors. Countless oral traditions disappeared when cultures were destroyed. Technologies have been lost and had to be reinvented. Roman concrete, whose recipe was forgotten for over 1,000 years. Damascus steel, whose production method is still debated. Even in modern times, knowledge can be lost. The plans for the Saturn V rocket that sent humans to the moon are archived, but their expertise, the tacit knowledge that engineers possessed, has largely vanished as those engineers retired or died. Atlantis symbolizes this loss. It represents the knowledge we might have had, the understanding that might have existed, the wisdom that could have been transmitted to us but wasn't because catastrophe intervened. And it reminds us that our own knowledge is fragile, that if our civilization collapsed, much of what we know would be lost, that digital records might be unreadable without functioning computers, that books decay, that oral traditions die with their speakers. Preserving knowledge requires active effort, constant transmission, multiple redundant systems. We cannot assume it will survive automatically. Finally, the mystery of why we're drawn to Atlantis, why this story persists, why it continues to inspire searches and speculation and dreams of lost civilization. Perhaps because it speaks to something archetypal, something deeply embedded in human consciousness, the memory of paradise lost, the fall from grace, the golden age that preceded our current age of struggle, the sense that we've lost something precious, that our ancestors possessed wisdom we've forgotten, that the past holds secrets we need to recover. Every culture has these stories: the Garden of Eden, the Age of Innocence, the time when animals could talk, the Golden Age of Saturn, the era when gods walked among humans. These stories share a pattern. There was a better time, we left it, or were expelled from it. Now we struggle in a diminished world, yearning for what was lost. Atlantis is the Western world's most developed version of this story, and perhaps it persists because the longing it expresses is genuine, universal, eternal. We do feel that something has been lost. We do sense that modern life, for all its technological advancement, lacks something our ancestors possessed. Connection to nature, connection to community, connection to the sacred, connection to meaning beyond material success. Atlantis represents that lost connection, and searching for Atlantis is, at a deeper level, searching for that connection, trying to recover what's been lost, attempting to return to paradise, to regain the wisdom and the virtue and the sense of rightness that the myth tells us once existed. Tonight, let these mysteries be your meditation. The pattern of rise and fall, the impossibility of permanent perfection, the fragility of memory, the ever-present possibility of catastrophe, the knowledge that has been lost, and the longing for what might have been, for the golden age, for the lost paradise, for Atlantis. These mysteries don't need solving. They need contemplating. They need to be held in awareness, considered, felt, understood, not as problems requiring solutions, but as realities requiring acceptance, wisdom requiring integration. Sleep now with the mysteries of Atlantis, not the geographical mystery of where it might have been, but the deeper mysteries of what it means, what it teaches, what it reveals about human nature and human civilization, and the eternal cycles of creation and destruction that shape our world. The symbolism of sinking, what Atlantis represents. Let's explore now the symbolic meaning of Atlantis sinking beneath the waves. Why does the destruction take this specific form? What does it mean for a civilization to be swallowed by the ocean? Why does water, specifically, become the agent of Atlantis's destruction and concealment? Water in mythology and psychology represents the unconscious, the depths beneath conscious awareness, the realm of emotion and intuition, and everything that exists below the surface of rational thought. When something sinks into water, it doesn't cease to exist. It descends into depths, becomes hidden, remains present but inaccessible, there but not visible, real but not available to ordinary perception. Atlantis sinking beneath the waves represents knowledge, wisdom, or capability descending into the unconscious, becoming inaccessible to conscious awareness, but remaining present in the depths, potentially recoverable through deep diving, through exploration of the unconscious, through the difficult work of bringing to light what has been submerged. This gives the Atlantis story a psychological dimension. We all have an Atlantis in our unconscious, knowledge we once possessed and have forgotten, capabilities we once had and have lost, understanding that was once available and has been submerged beneath years of conditioning, trauma, forgetting. Childhood knowledge is Atlantean in this sense. Children possess certain kinds of wisdom that adults lose. Direct perception, unfiltered experience, the ability to be fully present, to play without self-consciousness, to create without judging, to feel without suppressing. As we grow, we lose these capabilities. They sink beneath the waves of socialization, education, responsibility. They descend into the unconscious. They become Atlantis, lost but not destroyed, hidden but not gone. The quest to find Atlantis, in this interpretation, becomes the quest to recover lost aspects of self, to dive into the unconscious and retrieve what's been submerged, to bring back to conscious awareness the knowledge and capability that has been forgotten. This is the work of therapy, of meditation, of any practice that explores the unconscious and attempts to integrate what's found there with conscious life. Atlantis also represents cultural knowledge that's been lost, indigenous wisdom, traditional practices, ways of knowing that modern industrial civilization has suppressed or destroyed. These ways of knowing have sunk beneath the waves of modernity, become inaccessible, dismissed as primitive or superstitious or irrelevant. But they're not destroyed. They remain in the depths, preserved in stories, in practices maintained by surviving indigenous communities, in genetic memory, in the collective unconscious that Carl Jung proposed as the repository of human experiences across generations. Recovering this knowledge, learning from indigenous peoples, recognizing the value in traditional wisdom, this is diving for Atlantis, searching for what modernity has submerged, attempting to integrate ancient wisdom with modern understanding. The ocean itself is significant. The ocean is vast, deep, mysterious. Most of it remains unexplored. Depths remain unreachable. The ocean keeps secrets, conceals what it holds, reveals nothing without tremendous effort and sophisticated technology. Placing Atlantis in the ocean ensures it remains mysterious, ensures that even if you believe it existed, you must acknowledge the difficulty of finding it, must recognize that some things remain beyond easy reach, must accept that the ocean doesn't give up its secrets willingly. This teaches respect for mystery, for the unknown, for the limits of human knowledge and capability. The ocean is stronger than us, deeper than we can easily reach, more vast than we can fully explore. If it holds Atlantis, the ocean will reveal it only if and when conditions allow, only if we develop the technology and the wisdom necessary to search properly, only if we approach with the humility and care that the ocean demands. This is true of all genuine mysteries. They don't yield to force or to entitlement. They open only to patience, to respect, to proper preparation. Atlantis sinking also represents the impermanence of all civilizations. What is built can be unmade. What rises above the surface can sink beneath it. What seems permanent is actually temporary. The waves that cover Atlantis remind us that the ocean of time washes over everything, that nothing built by humans lasts forever, that eventually the waters rise or the land sinks, and what seemed eternal is covered, hidden, lost to view, if not to existence. This is memento mori applied to civilizations rather than individuals. Remember that you are mortal. Remember that your civilization is mortal. Remember that everything passes, everything changes, everything that exists in time will eventually end. This could be depressing, but it can also be liberating. If nothing lasts forever, then loss is inevitable and grieving it is pointless. Better to appreciate what exists while it exists, to build beauty knowing it will eventually be destroyed, to create meaning knowing it will eventually be forgotten, to live fully knowing that life ends. Atlantis teaches this. The Atlanteans built magnificently, created a paradise, achieved greatness, and then it sank. Their achievement was real, even though it didn't last. Their civilization mattered, even though it ended. The fact that Atlantis was destroyed doesn't negate its existence. It confirms the pattern, the cycle, the truth that all things rise and fall, build and collapse, exist and cease to exist. Finally, Atlantis beneath the waves represents the allure of the hidden, the appeal of the secret, the attraction of what cannot be easily accessed. We're drawn to hidden knowledge, secret wisdom, lost civilizations, precisely because they're hidden, secret, lost. If Atlantis were above water, easily visited, fully documented, it would lose much of its fascination. The mystery is the attraction. The inaccessibility is the appeal. We want what we cannot easily have. We value what requires effort to obtain. We're compelled by mysteries precisely because they're mysterious. Atlantis serves this psychological need. It remains mysterious, remains hidden, remains just beyond reach. And this ensures we continue to be fascinated by it, continue to search for it, continue to project onto it our hopes and dreams and longings for lost perfection. If Atlantis were ever definitively found or definitively proven never to have existed, we would lose something valuable. We would lose the mystery, the search, the possibility. We would have answers where we once had questions. And while answers have value, so do questions. Sometimes the question is more valuable than any possible answer. Sometimes the search is more important than any possible finding. Sometimes mystery itself is the gift, and solving it would be a loss rather than a gain. Tonight, let Atlantis remain beneath the waves. Let it stay hidden in the depths. Let it be mysterious, alluring, just beyond reach. Let it represent all that you've lost and might recover, all the wisdom that's been submerged and might be retrieved, all the aspects of self and culture and humanity that have sunk into unconscious depths and wait to be rediscovered. You don't need to bring Atlantis to the surface. You just need to know it's there, deep below, holding its secrets, preserving what's been lost, waiting with the patience of the ocean depths for those brave enough to dive down, patient enough to search, wise enough to recognize what they find. The modern Atlantis, what we're really searching for, sons. The 21st century searches for Atlantis continue. Expeditions explore underwater sites, researchers analyze ancient texts, documentaries present new theories, books argue for new locations. The search goes on despite centuries of failure to produce definitive proof, despite mainstream archaeology's rejection of Atlantis as historical reality, despite the overwhelming likelihood that Plato invented the story for philosophical purposes. Why? Why do we keep searching? What are we really looking for when we search for Atlantis? Perhaps we're searching for validation that the ancients possessed wisdom we've lost. Modern civilization prides itself on progress, on advancement, on being more knowledgeable and capable than any previous culture. But this pride is mixed with doubt. We see the problems modern civilization creates: environmental destruction, nuclear weapons, climate change, social fragmentation, mental health crises. We wonder if our ancestors, for all their lack of modern technology, might have possessed wisdom we've lost, understanding we've forgotten, ways of living that were more sustainable, more meaningful, more connected. Finding Atlantis would validate this intuition. It would prove that an ancient civilization was advanced, sophisticated, knowledgeable. It would show that history is not simple linear progress from primitive past to advanced present, but rather a complex pattern of rise and fall, with peaks of achievement in unexpected places and times. It would humble us, teach us that we're not the pinnacle of human development, but one point in a cycle that has repeated before and will repeat again. Perhaps we're searching for hope, that knowledge can be recovered. If Atlantis existed and held advanced knowledge, and if we could find it, we might recover that knowledge, learn from it, integrate it into modern understanding. This hope drives alternative archaeology, the search for lost technologies, ancient wisdom, advanced capabilities possessed by cultures we've dismissed as primitive. Whether Atlantis is the right symbol for this hope is debatable, but the hope itself is understandable. We're facing problems that seem intractable with current knowledge. Climate change, political polarization, the threat of nuclear war, the challenge of creating sustainable global civilization. Perhaps ancient wisdom could help. Perhaps techniques we've forgotten, perspectives we've lost, understanding our ancestors possessed. Perhaps recovering these could provide insights needed to solve modern problems. Finding Atlantis becomes a symbol of this possibility, a representation of hope that not all wisdom resides in the present, that the past has gifts for us if we can find them. Perhaps we're searching for meaning beyond materialism. Modern civilization is extraordinarily successful at producing material wealth, at least for some. But material success doesn't necessarily create meaning, fulfillment, happiness. Many people in wealthy countries report feeling empty, purposeless, disconnected despite material abundance. Atlantis represents a civilization that achieved material success but then lost it through moral failure. The story warns against prioritizing wealth over virtue, power over justice, material advancement over spiritual development. Searching for Atlantis can be, at a deeper level, searching for an example of how civilization should balance material and spiritual, how to achieve prosperity without losing soul. If we could find Atlantis, could understand how it succeeded and why it failed, perhaps we could learn to avoid its mistakes, to build civilization that maintains moral center even while achieving material success. Perhaps we're searching for connection to something larger than ourselves. Modern life can feel fragmented, isolated, small. We're cut off from nature, from community, from history, from any sense of participating in something greater than individual existence. Atlantis represents connection to deep history, to ancient wisdom, to a narrative that spans millennia. Being part of the search for Atlantis, even if the search is ultimately unsuccessful, connects us to thousands of years of seekers, to Plato, to generations who have pondered the mystery, to the possibility that human story is deeper and stranger and more mysterious than conventional history suggests. This connection provides meaning. It links us to the past and to others in the present who share the search. It gives us a quest, a purpose, something to investigate that matters more than daily routines and material concerns. Whether we find Atlantis or not, the search itself is meaningful because it connects us to deep questions, to mysteries that have fascinated humans for millennia, to the possibility that there's more to existence than what's visible on the surface. Perhaps we're searching for permission to believe in mystery. Modern culture emphasizes scientific rationality, empirical evidence, skepticism toward claims that cannot be proven. This is valuable, has produced tremendous benefits, has freed us from many false beliefs and superstitions. But it can also create a world that feels disenchanted, empty of magic, devoid of mystery. Everything must be explained, proven, understood. Nothing is allowed to remain mysterious. Atlantis resists this. It remains mysterious despite centuries of investigation. It might be real, might be fiction, might be something in between. We don't know, might never know. And this unknowing is itself valuable. It reminds us that reality is bigger than what we can prove, that mystery persists despite our efforts to eliminate it, that some questions might not have definitive answers, and that's okay, that's even necessary. Searching for Atlantis, taking seriously the possibility that it existed, remaining open to mystery even in the face of skepticism and lack of evidence. This is an act of maintaining enchantment, of refusing to let the world be completely explained, of preserving space for wonder, for possibility, for things that might be true even though we cannot yet prove them. Finally, perhaps we're searching for Atlantis, because the alternative, accepting that all mysteries can be solved, that every question has an answer, that nothing remains hidden, is actually more frightening than living with mystery. A world completely known is a world without wonder. A reality fully explained is a reality diminished. If every mystery is solved, if every question is answered, if nothing remains to discover, then exploration ends. Curiosity becomes obsolete. The future holds only implementation of what we already know, not revelation of what we've yet to discover. This would be a sad world, a complete world, a finished world. Atlantis remaining mysterious, remaining undiscovered, possibly undiscoverable, ensures the world remains unfinished, incomplete, open to discovery. As long as Atlantis might be found, the world holds secrets. As long as the mystery persists, we have something to search for. As long as the ocean might hold sunken civilizations, reality is bigger than what we currently know. Maintaining this openness, preserving this mystery, refusing to close the book and declare everything known, this is essential to human flourishing. We need mystery. We need the unknown. We need questions without answers. Atlantis provides this. Whether it existed or not, the search for it maintains mystery, keeps questions open, ensures the world remains enchanted, unfinished, full of possibility. Tonight, as you rest, consider what you're really searching for when you search for Atlantis or for any mystery. Validation, hope, meaning, connection, permission to wonder, the need for an incomplete universe. All of these are legitimate. All of these are human needs that deserve honoring. You don't need to find Atlantis to meet these needs. The search itself meets them. The wondering, the questioning, the maintaining of openness to mystery, this is enough. This is valuable. This is gift that Atlantis, real or imaginary, historical or allegorical, gives to everyone who engages with its mystery. Let yourself search in your dreams tonight. Search for lost cities, sunken wisdom, golden ages. Let the search be peaceful, curious, open. Let it take you to ocean depths, to ancient times, to possibilities beyond what you know for certain. And let the search never end, never conclude, never close the book. Let Atlantis remain mysterious. Let it stay lost. Let it be the symbol of everything we're searching for, everything we've lost, everything we might recover if we're brave enough to dive deep, patient enough to search thoroughly, wise enough to recognize what we find even if it's not what we expected. Atlantis waits in the depths, not to be found necessarily, but to inspire seeking, not to provide answers, but to maintain questions, not to end mystery, but to preserve it. And in this preservation of mystery, in this eternal searching, in this refusal to let everything be known, Atlantis gives its greatest gift, wonder. The sense that reality is bigger, stranger, more mysterious than we know. The certainty that secrets remain. The knowledge that we don't know everything, might never know everything. And that's not a failing, but the very condition that makes exploration possible, discovery meaningful, life worth living. The eternal mystery, Atlantis in the deep. We have journeyed now through multiple mysteries of Atlantis, the original story Plato told. the searches for real locations that might have inspired it, the symbolic meanings it carries, the psychological and cultural needs it fulfills. Each layer reveals new questions, new possibilities, new ways of understanding why this story persists, why it matters, why it continues to fascinate 2,400 years after it was written. And we return finally to the central mystery. What if Atlantis still holds unanswered mysteries? Not the mystery of its location, which might never be resolved. Not the mystery of whether it existed, which depends on how you define existence. Whether you require physical, historical reality or accept that stories can exist in other ways, can be real in the realm of meaning and symbol and cultural memory, even if they never described actual places and events. The deeper mystery is why we need Atlantis, why this story specifically, among countless ancient tales, has maintained such powerful hold on human imagination, why people continue searching despite rational certainty that they won't find anything, why Atlantis appears in movies, books, games, art, always recognizable, always powerful, always mysterious. Perhaps Atlantis endures because it perfectly captures multiple universal human experiences and needs in a single narrative. The experience of loss, of having possessed something precious and then losing it. The experience of wondering if our ancestors were wiser than us. The need to believe that knowledge can be recovered, that what's lost isn't gone forever. The longing for golden ages, for paradise, for times when everything was better. The awareness that civilizations rise and fall, that nothing lasts forever, that catastrophe can strike without warning. The certainty that the ocean holds secrets, that depths remain unexplored, that reality is bigger than what we know. All of this compressed into one story, one lost civilization, one sunken island. Atlantis serves as a container for all these meanings, a symbol flexible enough to carry whatever interpretation we need, whatever message we're ready to hear. This is the mark of a truly powerful myth. It means different things to different people. It teaches different lessons, depending on who's listening and when. It remains relevant across centuries because it's not fixed in single interpretation, but opens to multiple readings, multiple truths, multiple possibilities. Atlantis is historical allegory for those who see it as Plato's philosophical teaching. It's genuine lost civilization for those who believe ancient advanced cultures existed and were destroyed. Its psychological symbol for those who interpret it as representing the unconscious and lost aspects of self. Its cultural memory for those who see it as preserving fragments of real catastrophic events wrapped in myth. Its environmental warning for those who read it as teaching that civilizations must respect nature or face destruction. Its spiritual lesson for those who understand it as showing the dangers of materialism and the necessity of maintaining virtue. All these interpretations are valid. All find support in the text. All serve purposes for those who hold them. The mystery is not which interpretation is correct, but how one story can be all these things simultaneously, can serve so many purposes, can teach so many lessons, can remain meaningful across such vastly different worldviews and historical contexts. This is the real mystery of Atlantis. Not where it was, but what it is. Not whether it existed, but why it persists. Not what we find when we search for it, but what we discover about ourselves in the searching. Atlantis is a mirror. We see in it what we bring to it. We find in it what we're searching for. We interpret it according to our needs, our beliefs, our questions. And because it's lost, because it's mysterious, because we cannot definitively prove or disprove any interpretation, it remains open to infinite readings, infinite meanings, infinite possibilities. This openness is the gift. This flexibility is the power. This mystery is the teaching. Atlantis shows us that not everything needs definitive answers, that some things are more valuable as questions than as solved puzzles, that mystery itself has purpose, serves needs, provides gifts that finding and proving and closing the book could never provide. Tonight, let Atlantis remain mysterious. Let it sink into your unconscious as you sink into sleep. Let it rest in the depths of your dreams, holding whatever secrets it holds, teaching whatever lessons you're ready to learn, reflecting whatever you most need to see. You don't need to find Atlantis. You don't need to prove it existed or prove it didn't. You don't need to choose a single interpretation or defend a particular theory. You just need to honor the mystery, respect the unknown, appreciate the gift that Atlantis gives simply by remaining lost, remaining mysterious, remaining forever, just beyond reach. The ocean holds Atlantis if it exists. The unconscious holds Atlantis if it's a symbol. Memory holds Atlantis if it's based on real events. Philosophy holds Atlantis if it's Plato's teaching. And story holds Atlantis regardless of everything else, because the story exists, has existed for 2,400 years, will continue to exist as long as humans tell stories, ask questions, search for meaning beyond surface reality. Sleep now with Atlantis resting in the depths below your consciousness. Let it be there, mysterious and beautiful, lost but not gone, sunken but preserved, waiting for some future moment when you might dive deep enough, search thoroughly enough, be ready finally to discover what it holds. But not tonight. Tonight, let it rest. Let it remain mysterious. Let it teach through its absence rather than its presence, through its mystery rather than its revelation, through the questions it raises rather than any answers it might provide. Atlantis has waited for over 2,000 years. It can wait a while longer. And you, having journeyed through its mysteries, having explored its meanings, having honored its enduring power, you can rest now, can sleep peacefully, can dream of lost cities and golden ages and sunken wisdom, can float on the surface while Atlantis rests below. Both of you existing, both of you real in your own ways, both of you holding mysteries that don't need solving, that don't require answers, that exist beautifully, perfectly, eternally, as questions, as possibilities, as the mysteries that make life worth living. Good night. Sleep deeply, dream mysteriously, and let Atlantis sleep too, in whatever depths it inhabits, holding its secrets, maintaining its mystery, giving its gifts of wonder and search, and the eternal beautiful question, what if? The material clues, when myth leaves something you can hold. Even though Atlantis may be Plato's invention, the story keeps tugging at us because it sounds like the kind of thing that could happen. Islands do explode, cities do sink, coastlines do vanish beneath rising seas. And sometimes the world offers small physical clues that feel like they belong to Atlantis, even if they don't prove anything. One of those clues is Plato's strange metal, orichalcum. He describes it as rare, highly valued, and second only to gold. For centuries, orichalcum lived in the same place Atlantis lived, half in history, half in imagination. but modern archaeology has found ancient metal ingots identified as orichalcum in the classical sense, typically a copper-zinc alloy, essentially an early form of brass. A well-known set of such ingots was recovered from a shipwreck near Gela, Sicily, and scientific analysis supports that composition. Now, this doesn't connect directly to Atlantis. Plato could simply be using a real prestigious material name to make his fictional city feel tangible. But it shows something important. Plato's details often have one foot in the real world. The story is not random. It is stitched together from things that genuinely existed: metals, harbors, canals, empires, moral decline, and catastrophic loss. Another material clue isn't metal at all. It's a real city that vanished into water in historical time, in a way so clean and dramatic that it feels like a miniature Atlantis. In ancient Greece, the city of Helika was destroyed by a powerful earthquake and then submerged. Ancient writers describe it as disappearing in a single night. Modern geological and remote sensing research has investigated the processes that could explain this sudden submergence. Liquefaction, coastal collapse, and rapid drowning of a low-lying delta plain. Again, Halik is not Atlantis, but it proves that the sinking city motif is not merely poetic. It is a thing that can happen, suddenly, violently, and memorably. A story like Atlantis doesn't need to be literally true to be born from truth-adjacent experiences. Earthquakes, floods, drowned coastlines, and civilizations shocked into remembering. And then there is the candidate that keeps returning again and again, like a wave: Thera, Santorini, and the Bronze Age world shaken by its eruption. Archaeology at Akrotiri reveals a sophisticated settlement buried beneath ash, preserved in silence. The eruption's precise date remains debated in scholarly work because different methods, radiocarbon, archaeological synchronisms, ice core correlations, don't always line up neatly, and researchers continue to refine the timeline and implications. For Atlantis seekers, this matters because it shows how a single event can ripple into legend. A bright island shattered, a maritime culture disrupted, coastlines hit by waves, trade networks broken, and a memory of fire and water carried forward into story. Plato's date may not match, his geography may not match, but the feel of the catastrophe fits so well that the idea refuses to die. And beyond sudden catastrophe, there's the slower, quieter drowning of land at the end of the last ice age, an event that shaped human coastlines everywhere. Entire landscapes once walked by humans are now beneath the sea, not because they sank in a day, but because sea levels rose over thousands of years. In places like the North Sea, researchers study submerged prehistoric landscapes, lost worlds of rivers, forests, and settlements, sometimes gathered under the name Doggerland. This doesn't prove Atlantis, but it explains the deep psychological plausibility behind it. Humans really did lose land to the sea. People really did watch shorelines retreat, familiar places vanish, the map of home rewritten by water. Over a long time, that kind of loss becomes story, and story becomes symbol. In this light, Atlantis begins to look less like a single point on a map and more like a shape in human memory. The drowned place, the lost homeland, the warning written in salt water, which brings us back to Plato himself. Most modern scholarly interpretation treats Atlantis as a philosophical construction, an example story used to explore political virtue, hubris, and the fragility of civilizations. Plato places it inside dialogues that are explicitly moral and political, and that framing matters. Atlantis, then, becomes a kind of mirror held up to every powerful society. You can be brilliant and still be brittle. You can be wealthy and still be wrong. You can build rings of stone and water and still be swallowed by the forces you thought you controlled. Tonight, let all these layers settle gently. Let the evidence remain what it truly is. Not a final answer, but a trail of real-world echoes that keep the Atlantis story believable enough to haunt us. A metal that existed, a city that vanished, an island that exploded, a coastline that drowned, and a philosopher who understood that the most powerful stories are the ones that sit right on the edge, where history and symbol overlap like moonlight on water. The map of possibility, where Atlantis could hide and why it rarely does. If Atlantis was ever a literal place, then sooner or later it must answer a very simple question. Where is the body? Civilizations don't vanish cleanly. Cities leave rubble. Ports leave breakwaters. Quarries leave scars. Roads leave alignments. Even when water claims a coastline, the sea often preserves what the land would destroy: walls, foundations, pottery fields, anchor stones. So the modern hunt for Atlantis is no longer just romantic diving and hopeful imagination. It's also sonar, satellites, geology, and the cold logic of seafloor maps. And this is where the story becomes both more fascinating and more humbling. Because the deeper modern science looks, the harder it becomes for a giant Atlantis to hide anywhere near where Plato seems to place it. Let's start with Plato's most tempting clue: beyond the Pillars of Heracles. In Greek imagination, that meant past the Strait of Gibraltar, out into the Atlantic, leaving the familiar Mediterranean behind. That single phrase has shaped centuries of searching, pushing people to look along Atlantic-facing coasts. Southern Spain, Morocco, Portugal, the Canary Islands, the Azores, and the shelf areas that would have been exposed when sea levels were lower. One serious cluster of theories gathers around southern Spain, near the marshlands and coastal plains west of Gibraltar. Here, you find a landscape that has changed repeatedly over time: shifting river mouths, sediment buildup, coastal lagoons, tsunamis that have struck the region historically. Some researchers have proposed that Plato's Atlantis might be a distorted memory of a real Bronze Age center in the Iberian world, sometimes linked to the legendary Tartessos, a wealthy culture known from ancient sources and archaeology. The attraction here isn't that we've found a perfect ringed city. It's that the region matches a basic Atlantis logic: a prosperous coastal power, trade routes, and a real history of flooding events that could erase or bury low-lying settlements beneath mud and water. This would also explain Plato's detail about the sea becoming muddy and difficult to navigate after the catastrophe, because deltas and marshlands create exactly that kind of shallow, silty hazard. But there's a difference between a coastal site destroyed and buried and a continent-scale island swallowed in a day. The more you focus on Spain and Morocco, the more Atlantis starts shrinking into something plausible. Not a continent, but a regional power that later storytellers magnified into a world-dominating empire. That kind of exaggeration is normal in myth. The past gets bigger when it's retold. Then there are the Atlantic island candidates, especially the ones that feel like stepping stones into mystery: the Azores, Madeira, the Canaries. These are real islands, some volcanic, some dramatic, and they sit where imagination loves to place Atlantis, out on the ocean. People sometimes argue that Atlantis could have been a larger island system here during the last ice age, when sea levels were lower. But here modern geology becomes a strict teacher. Lower sea levels can reveal coastal plains and connect nearby islands with shallow shelves, yes. But they do not magically create a vanished super island the size Plato describes. And they don't support a scenario where a vast landmass collapses overnight without leaving clear geological evidence. Still, the Azores idea persists because it gives the story a perfect stage. Mist, cliffs, deep water, lost feeling. It's Atlantis as mood. And mood is powerful. It keeps theories alive, even when the physical evidence stays quiet. Another group of proposals relocates Atlantis into the Mediterranean, even though Plato's wording seems to push it outward. The best-known version is the Thera, Santorini, and Minoan world idea. An advanced seafaring civilization, catastrophic volcanic eruption, tsunamis, widespread disruption. This candidate remains popular, not because it fits every line Plato wrote, but because it fits the shape of the story. Brilliance, power, sudden destruction by water and earth, and a memory that could echo forward. In this interpretation, Plato's Atlantis is not a map. Reference. It's a moral parable built from real disaster material. And then we have the candidates that show how hungry people are for certainty. Places where natural geology accidentally looks designed. The Rishat structure in Mauritania, for example, looks like concentric rings from the air. Beautiful, hypnotic, and instantly Atlantean to the pattern-seeking mind. But geology can make circles. Erosion can draw rings. Nature creates the shapes our brains want to interpret as architecture. And this is the trap. The Atlantis story primes us to see Atlantis everywhere, especially in circles, because Plato's capital city was circular. The same pattern repeats in underwater discoveries that go viral. Straight lines, right angles, roads, walls. Sometimes they really are human-made. Ancient harbors, fish traps, stone alignments. But often they are natural formations, or modern debris, or geology that happens to break in tidy-looking ways. The ocean is full of optical illusions. This is where modern technology changes the tone of the search. We live in an era where large sections of the seafloor have been mapped at scales unimaginable to earlier Atlantis hunters. Not every square meter is resolved like a city street map, but enough is known that certain claims become harder to defend. If a massive island continent sank in the Atlantic in geologically recent time, we would expect to see scars, giant collapsed zones, unusual sediment layers, displaced blocks, and a footprint that screams catastrophe. Instead, most of the Atlantic basin tells a slow story. Plate movement, ridge spreading, sediments settling patiently. The ocean is not hiding a missing continent the way a closet hides a coat. It's more like a library. It keeps records, and those records are stubborn. So what does that leave us? It leaves us with a quieter, more realistic Atlantis, one that still feels mysterious, but is anchored to how the world actually works. Atlantis that might be, a real coastal city or culture erased by tsunami and burial, later magnified into legend, a memory of multiple disasters fused into one perfect story, a philosophical invention that uses real-world materials to feel true, a symbol that survives precisely because it refuses to be pinned down, and in a strange way, that makes Atlantis even more powerful. Because the question shifts. It becomes less, where is Atlantis? And more, why do we keep needing Atlantis to be somewhere? Tonight, as you drift deeper into rest, imagine the ocean not as a liar, but as a keeper of fragments, a broken amphora here, a buried harbor wall there, a shoreline that used to be dry land, now silent underwater. Atlantis may not be one grand ruin waiting to be found. It may be the idea that human greatness can disappear, sometimes suddenly, sometimes slowly, and that the sea, patient and indifferent, will simply continue to move above it. The Ice Age memory, why Plato's date refuses to go away. One detail in Plato's Atlantis story has bothered scholars, skeptics, and believers alike for centuries: the date. According to the Egyptian priest quoted by Critias, Atlantis was destroyed 9,000 years before Solon, placing the catastrophe around 9600 BCE. For a long time, this date was dismissed outright. No cities, no metallurgy, no empires were supposed to exist that early. Humans, according to older models of prehistory, were still primitive hunter-gatherers, barely capable of permanent settlement, let alone vast island civilizations with canals and navies. So the date was labeled impossible, symbolic, or simply wrong. But here's where the mystery deepens, because 9600 BCE is not a random number. It sits right at the end of the last ice age, during one of the most dramatic periods of environmental change in human history. Around this time, the planet was warming rapidly. Massive ice sheets that had covered large portions of North America and Eurasia were melting. Sea levels were rising, not gently, but in pulses. Entire coastlines were being redrawn. Lands that humans had lived on for thousands of years were slowly and sometimes suddenly swallowed by the sea. Rivers changed course. Fertile plains disappeared. The world our ancestors knew was ending, and a new one was beginning. This matters because humans had already been living along coasts, rivers, and fertile lowlands for tens of thousands of years by then. When the Ice Age ended, those were the exact places most affected. If you lived near the shore, your homeland didn't sink in a day in a cinematic sense, but over a few generations, the sea advanced relentlessly. Villages vanished, sacred places were lost. Burial grounds disappeared. Memory itself began to drown. Now imagine what that looks like when passed down orally over thousands of years. A place that was once there and now is under the sea. A homeland lost to water. A catastrophe tied to moral meaning, because humans always attach meaning to loss. Over time, the slow process compresses. Generations collapse into one. Gradual flooding becomes a single terrible event. And eventually, the story reaches someone like Plato, not as raw data, but as mythic memory. This interpretation doesn't require Atlantis to be a high-tech empire. It requires something more subtle, and in many ways, more believable. That Plato's Atlantis preserves a distorted memory of real post-Ice Age flooding, shaped by storytelling, symbolism, and philosophy. This also explains why Atlantis feels ancient even to Plato, not just old, but impossibly old, older than Greece, older than Egypt even. It's not meant to sit comfortably inside recorded history. It belongs to a deeper layer of human memory, the threshold between prehistory and myth. And here, something remarkable happens. The story of Atlantis begins to align with discoveries that Plato could never have imagined. In the last few decades, archaeology has pushed the timeline of complex human behavior far deeper into the past than once believed. Monumental stone structures, organized labor, symbolic architecture, long-distance trade. All of these now appear before the rise of agriculture in some places. Sites like Göbekli Tepe, dating back to roughly the same era Plato names, show that humans were capable of large-scale construction, complex symbolism, and organized ritual life far earlier than previously assumed. This doesn't mean Göbekli Tepe was Atlantis. It means the old assumption, nothing sophisticated could exist that early, is no longer safe, which raises an uncomfortable, fascinating question. What else existed along Ice Age coastlines that are now underwater? Because here is the quiet truth modern archaeology is coming to terms with. Most of prehistoric human history is underwater. When sea levels rose by over 100 meters after the Ice Age, they erased enormous portions of the human past. Camps, villages, trade routes, sacred sites, all drowned. We are trying to reconstruct early civilization while missing a huge percentage of the evidence. Atlantis, in this sense, may not be one city. It may be the symbolic name for an entire lost world, a world humans once inhabited along coastlines that no longer exist. Plato, consciously or not, may have given that loss a narrative shape. And then there is the psychological weight of water itself. Flood myths appear everywhere. Mesopotamia, India, the Americas, China. Civilizations across the globe remember a time when water destroyed the old world. These stories don't all describe the same event, but they describe the same experience. Helplessness in the face of rising water, the collapse of the familiar, survival amid destruction. Atlantis fits perfectly into this global pattern. It is the Greek world's flood myth, but refined, moralized, and philosophically sharpened. Instead of a god saving a chosen few in a boat, Plato gives us a civilization that fails ethically and is removed entirely. No survivors, no reset, just disappearance. And this brings us to a crucial insight. Atlantis is not about survival. It is about erasure. That's why it haunts us. Most myths offer continuity. Someone survives. Humanity begins again. Atlantis offers none of that. Atlantis is wiped away. Its knowledge is lost. Its people vanish. Even its location becomes uncertain. This is rare and deeply unsettling, because it forces us to confront a possibility we don't like to think about, that civilizations can end without leaving heirs, that knowledge can disappear completely, that progress is not guaranteed to continue. This is why Atlantis resurfaces most strongly during times of anxiety, periods of rapid change, environmental fear, technological upheaval, cultural fragmentation. When people sense that their world is unstable, Atlantis returns, not as history, but as warning. Tonight, let this idea settle gently. Atlantis may not be a place waiting to be found by sonar or satellites. It may be the echo of humanity's first great loss, the moment when the old world drowned and the modern one began. And that would explain why the story feels so deep, so ancient, so heavy with meaning. Because it isn't just about a city. It's about the world we lost before history began. Why Athens had to win, power, virtue, and Plato's quiet warning. One of the most revealing details in Plato's Atlantis story is not Atlantis itself, but who defeats it. Atlantis, for all its wealth, technology, and naval dominance, is ultimately stopped by ancient Athens. Not the Athens Plato lived in, but a mythic, idealized version of Athens that existed long before recorded history. This is not accidental. This is Plato doing philosophy through story. In Plato's version, Atlantis is stronger, richer, larger, more advanced. Its empire stretches across lands. Its navy dominates the sea, and yet it loses. Not because Athens is more powerful, but because Athens is more virtuous. Athens wins because it represents balance, restraint, discipline, and moral order. Atlantis loses because it represents excess. Too much wealth, too much expansion, too much confidence in power itself. This contrast is the moral engine of the entire myth. Plato lived in a time when Athens had already tasted imperial power and suffered catastrophic defeat. The Peloponnesian War ended with Athens humbled, its empire broken, its confidence shattered. Plato had seen what unchecked ambition could do to a civilization. He had watched democracy fail, watched demagogues rise, watched moral clarity dissolve into political chaos. Atlantis is not about some distant island. Atlantis is about Athens itself, and by extension, about every powerful society that mistakes dominance for wisdom. By making ancient Athens the moral victor, Plato creates a mirror for his audience. He's not praising the Athens of his own time. He is criticizing it. He is saying, "You were once capable of virtue, and you have forgotten it." Atlantis is what happens when power is no longer guided by restraint. Athens, in the story, represents what power should look like when governed by principle. And this is why Atlantis must be destroyed completely. Plato doesn't allow it to retreat, reform, or learn its lesson. It vanishes. The sea closes over it. No second chance. This is not cruelty, it's clarity. Plato is making a philosophical point. A civilization that abandons virtue does not slowly fade. It eventually collapses. This idea feels uncomfortably modern. We live in a world of immense technological power, global reach, instant communication, vast wealth, but also deep inequality, environmental strain, political polarization, and moral confusion about what progress actually means. Like Atlantis, we are incredibly capable, and like Atlantis, we often assume that capability alone will save us. Plato's story says it won't. Atlantis had everything except self-restraint, and that absence was fatal. This brings us to the deepest reason the Atlantis story endures. It is not because we think we will find a sunken city. It is because we sense intuitively that we might be living inside the same pattern, that our world, like Atlantis, is brilliant and fragile at the same time. That collapse doesn't come from ignorance, but from forgetting what matters while knowing how to do almost everything else. Atlantis survives because it speaks to a fear we cannot dismiss, that civilization can become too clever for its own good. And yet, the story is not hopeless. Plato does not end with Atlantis. He ends with the idea of balance, of societies grounded in virtue, of limits respected, of power restrained by wisdom. Atlantis is not just a warning, it is a guidepost pointing away from disaster. Atlantis as a living mystery. After thousands of years, Atlantis remains unfound. No coordinates, no ruins that satisfy everyone. No final proof. And perhaps that is exactly as it should be. Because Atlantis was never meant to be solved like a puzzle. It was meant to be remembered, contemplated, returned to again and again as circumstances change. It is a story that adapts to the anxieties of each era. To Plato, it was a warning about empire and moral decay. To later generations, it became a symbol of lost knowledge. To us, it reflects fears about environmental collapse, technological overreach, and the fragility of global systems. Atlantis is powerful because it exists in the space between history and meaning. It reminds us that civilizations can disappear, that knowledge can be lost, that progress is not permanent, and that virtue, not power, is what determines how long a society endures. Whether Atlantis was a real place, a distorted memory, or a philosophical invention matters less than the fact that it still speaks to us, still unsettles us, still invites us to ask uncomfortable questions about who we are and where we're going. Tonight, you don't need to decide what Atlantis was. You don't need to choose a theory. You can let it remain what it has always been, a deep, quiet mystery resting beneath the surface of human thought, surfacing only when we're ready to listen. Let the ocean keep its secrets. Let the past remain vast. And let mystery exist without needing resolution. If this journey into the mystery of Atlantis brought you calm, curiosity, or quiet reflection, consider liking the video and subscribing to Mythical Stories. Your support helps us continue creating immersive, peaceful explorations of ancient civilizations, lost worlds, and enduring mysteries. Stories designed not to overwhelm, but to soothe, inspire, and accompany you into rest. Thank you for being here. Sleep deeply, and let Atlantis remain where it belongs, just beyond reach, timeless and beautifully unknown.